Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to everybody. To those of you who weren't in earlier, just to say that my name is Kath Molonga. I'm a Development Support Manager for Hub Cymru Africa, and this is day 3 of Meet the Funder Week. We'll be sharing some information at the end of the session about what else is happening this week. But today we're hearing from Linnea Renton about common mistakes in funding applications and how to avoid them. Just quickly running through some housekeeping. This project is funded by UK Aid Direct and with support also from the Welsh Government. It falls under the Springboard project. If you would like to be involved in the Springboard project, there's lots of online activities happening for Welsh-based organisations and their partners in Sub-Saharan Africa. So you can have a look on our website to learn more about that project. Due to background noise, please can you make sure that you keep yourself on mute unless you are actively speaking. If you do want to speak, at the bottom of your page, you can see there's a reaction symbol, like a smiley face with a plus sign on it. If you click on it, you can raise your hand and you can see a little hand pops up. I've just raised my hand so that you can see what it looks like. Little hand pops up, and then we know that you would like to speak. But essentially, if you have any questions for Linnea, please do put them in the chat, and I will be able to feed them to the Linnea later on in the session. This session is being recorded. If you don't want your face to be on the recording at all, because it will go on YouTube, just turn your camera off before you speak. And you can change your name to Anon if you don't want that to be there. We really encourage you to actively participate in these sessions. We think the more that you're involved in them, the more you learn and take away from them. But we recognise that not everybody is comfortable doing so. So please don't feel pressure that you have to. Please take part in our monitoring evaluation. There will be a form at the end of this session, a poll that we would ask that you please do take time to fill in. It only takes 2 minutes. It's a multiple choice form, and then following up after this event, after the week, next week, you will be sent an email with an online form, and please do take the time to fill that in. It helps us improve our services as well as justifying the services that we provide to our funder. This is a safe space for minoritized people. We have a zero tolerance policy towards any form of abuse, and you will be removed from the session. We welcome challenge, we welcome difficult conversations, we welcome a learning environment. And so if you're not sure of anything, then just ask, because we hope that we can discuss things openly. And if anything is offensive to you, please do say. But any kind of abuse, you will be removed, and then we will talk to you afterwards about it. If you'd like to have a look at our whistleblowing policy, or if you have any serious safeguarding concerns, then you can go to our senior partners website, and this is wcia.org.uk, and search for whistleblowing. Okay, so very quickly, I'm gonna hand over to Linnea now, and she's gonna talk for 20 minutes, and then we'll have time for audience questions. So if you have any questions whilst Linnea is speaking, put them in the chat, and then I'll feed them through to Linnea at the end. Thank you very much, Linnea. I'm gonna hand over to you.
Diolch yn fawr. Thanks very much, Kath. Afternoon to everybody. Pnawn da. I think, Kath, you are going to put my slides up, yeah? So if we just stick with that one for now, that's great. I've already seen a few familiar names in the list of participants, so that's nice. For anyone I haven't met yet, yes, my name is Linnea Renton. I usually describe myself as American by birth, Welsh by choice. And let me say right up front, I would not describe myself primarily as a fundraising consultant. My focus has mainly been on HIV, sexual health, and human rights. But what I am is somebody who has been very successful, thankfully, over the years in raising a lot of money for work that I believe in. So I just say that to reassure people that you don't have to be a fundraiser to be good at raising funds. So if we could look at the next slide, just to give you a bit of an overview of what I'm going to cover. During my 22 years now in Wales, I've worked for very small organizations and very large international ones as well. And in all of them, there's a never-ending pressure to get funds in, obviously, to keep the wheels turning and keep the lights on. And you see, I've shown it as a cycle, because that is what it's like. It's a continuous thing that you have to be involved in. And over the years, I've been involved, I think, in virtually every part of that, as a grant applicant, as a grant recipient, a number of years as a grant maker and grant evaluator, and for the last few years as a consultant, putting together applications for grants and reports on grants for various organizations. So I think during that time, I've seen just about every mistake under the sun. I'm sure I have made quite a few of them myself, but I think along the way, I've learned a lot, which I'm hoping to be able to share with you today. I think we all know funders always receive more applications than they can support. So they will always be looking for easy ways to reduce the pile. So in this session, we're going to look at some of the most common mistakes that applicants make, both before, during, and after applying for funding. And ideally, obviously, some ideas for how to avoid them. So if we go to the next slide. I've divided the mistakes beforehand into three main categories: ethical mistakes, strategic mistakes, and practical mistakes. Because I think it's important not just to jump straight down to the nuts and bolts. I think you need to be thinking about this in a broader sense. From the ethical point of view, I think we need to remember the importance of ethical partnerships. So one of the biggest ethical mistakes you can make before you even apply for the funding is not developing the project idea jointly with your partner, and not doing it in a way that gives priority to local expertise and analysis. You should not be putting together a proposal on your own at the Wales end and then bringing in an overseas partner at the end of it as window dressing. You need to be doing it together in a genuinely, in the form of a genuine partnership. And I also think an ethical issue to bear in mind is the ethical profile of any intended funders. If you sup with the devil, you better use a long spoon, as the saying goes. And you look at the position now with some arts organizations that have run into trouble because of sponsorship by BP or other fossil fuel companies. We can think of tobacco sponsorship of sports teams. In my area of sexual and reproductive health, big problems with USAID funding that restricted what organizations could do in relation to abortion or providing support to sex workers. So funding, the source of your funding needs to be consistent with your organizational values. Otherwise, basically, you're just helping them, quote unquote, charity wash their reputations at the risk of harming your own. And I know it can be, we can have this feeling when we're under pressure to get funding that beggars can't be choosers, but aligning yourself with the wrong funders can really cause you more harm than good in the long run. So next slide, please. Now, on the strategic front, there's sort of two ends of the spectrum. One mistake to make is scattershot applications, where you're just firing off generic requests to everyone you can find in a funding directory that has the vaguest connection with your project. Just same situation as with a job application. You're much more likely to be effective if you invest your time in targeting your applications to a small number where there's a closer fit between your aims and theirs. Otherwise, you end up tying yourself in knots and maybe distorting what you're doing or what you want to do just to fit with a funder. And not to name and shame, but to give an example, I will use fictitious names here. An example of an organization that I came across during my time as a grant maker. The application, it seemed a bit odd because it seemed the organization had actually changed its name several times over the years. So let's say, to sake of argument, it was focusing on agriculture. So originally it had a name something like AgriCare. Then a few years later, it seemed to change its name to Agri-Gender Care when there was a lot of money around for gender mainstreaming. And you think, okay, well, yeah, a lot of smallholder farmers are women, so, you know, fair play. But then a few years later, when there was a lot of HIV money around, it seemed to change again to Agri-Gender Care Positive. To, you know, again, you could say, right, HIV is an issue that's affecting a lot of places, but where is this organization actually going? And now that sustainability, you know, is a big thing, I don't know. Maybe they've gone back to AgriCare. I don't know. In which case, I hope they save the stationery. But you know, you do need to just not be blowing with every different type of funding that's available. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, you also don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. You need to diversify your sources of funding, ideally. And so you need to strike a balance of applications that fit with your capacity to do them, because I know as a trustee and previously as a staff member, you know, there's only so many you can do in order to do them well. And you also need to have the capacity to do the work, you know, if you win the funding. So another mistake at times that organizations make is trying to go it alone. So one thing to consider is whether you can look at a joint application or bidding for funding as part of a consortium. Funders often like this because it brings together complementary strengths and can lead to mutual learning, and it helps them spread their own risk. So that's something to think about. Next slide, please. On the practical front, the absolute #1 practical mistake that you can make is not reading the funder's requirements, especially the criteria for eligibility. I know, boring, right? But it's vital, and you'd be amazed how many applicants trip up at that point. It's just such a waste of everybody's time. You know, if you spend hours and hours putting together an application for something that you're not actually eligible for. And I have seen it time and time again, you know, where it says this funding is for organizations working in Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. And then the applications come in. It's like, well, my project's in Malawi, but it's a really good project. And you know, that's right next door to those countries. So where's that going to go? Of course, that application just goes straight in the bin. As I said at the beginning, funders are always looking for a reason to reduce their pile of applications. And, you know, don't give them an easy excuse to get rid of yours. I've also seen that in terms of eligibility on the financial or economic side, where there's, again, a boring looking requirement that says applicants must have had an average income of between X and Y for each of the last 3 years. And, you know, you'll always get applications. It's like, well, on average, it worked out at that, even though we didn't actually meet that criterion in the first year. That's going to go straight in the bin. Now, a number of funders, particularly bigger ones, do offer webinars or things like FAQs, you know, frequently asked questions, when they put out a call for proposals. So if that help is available, make use of it. That would be a mistake to avoid, is not making use of the help that's available, because it is there to help you avoid mistakes and increase your chances of success. So if you have questions, you can ask them through those facilities, or you can check regularly for updates if other people have asked questions that might be relevant to you. So now, getting down into the nuts and bolts of actually problems, you know, or mistakes to avoid inside your application. One that used to drive me crazy as a funder is when an applicant spends ages just describing the problem rather than presenting their solution. As a funder, the feeling is, okay, guys, we know it's a problem. That's why we've set aside money to address the problem. That's why we've designated this, you know, this round of funding. Of course, you may well be asked quite legitimately to present some analysis of your issue to demonstrate that you understand it, that you're aware of the local context. and so on. But the really important bit is, okay, so what? Yes, it's a problem, but what is your proposed solution? And why are you and your partners the best people to carry that out? Another one, I know some of this seems very basic, but again, people trip up on the basics all the time, is not actually answering the questions. And I know Kath has said to me before that there's been some feedback about, why do funders always ask that, the same thing 6 different ways, which is frustrating when you're trying to fill something in. It may seem like they're asking the same thing over and over, but there should, if you look at it carefully, there should be different aspects that you can highlight under each one. And, try and be careful about, checking through the whole application and seeing what they're asking and try to understand what it is that they're getting at with each question so that you can answer it effectively. But also don't be afraid, you don't want to repeat yourself. So don't be afraid to refer forward or back, see also section 4 above or what have you, if you feel like you've addressed part of the question elsewhere. That's also fine because, again, you don't want to write it twice and the funder doesn't want to read it twice either. Now, one of the really, really crucial ones here is not providing evidence for whatever you're trying to demonstrate. But more fundamental than that is not collecting evidence that you can provide. And this is something that every single organization can improve on, and something that all of you can be working on improving right now, even if you're not working on or planning a funding application right now, because it will always help you later. And I recognize, again, having worked and been a trustee of very small organizations, we're not talking about some giant, randomized controlled trial, gold standard, evaluation with thousands of participants. That's just not realistic for the scale of what most of us are doing. But even something is always better than nothing. And at its most basic, if we're talking about evidence of impact, it's showing some kind of comparison. In other words, it's when we started, the situation was X, we did Y, and now the situation is Z. And most crucially of all, and this is how we know. So likewise, of course, applications are going to ask about how do you intend to monitor your progress or impact of your project. It's the same thing again. You're going to be saying, okay, here's where we are now. Here's what we plan to do. Here's the situation that we intend to get to. And this is how we will know. You just need to be very clear about that, because otherwise the funder is not going to have that reassurance that you're going to be able to track what you're doing and that you're getting value from the funding that they're providing. Because of course they're going to be funders are answerable to the people who fund them as well. Next slide. Another one that comes up quite often and can seem quite jargony or quite intimidating is if you're asked for your theory of change. And one of the mistakes is not being able to articulate that if you're asked to do so. As I say, it sounds a bit intimidating, but if you take it down to the basics, a theory of change is just explaining how you think change happens. So in other words, it's saying very clearly what your assumptions are, that if you do this type of activity, this is what you're assuming, how those activities are going to translate into the impact that you're trying to make. And the reason that this has become very popular within organizations and for funders is that very often those assumptions have been unspoken. And so if you don't lay out and think through those assumptions, then it's much harder to pinpoint where a project has gone wrong because you haven't thought it through. And I know from having gone through this process as a trustee with my fellow trustees, it does help focus your own mind even before you get to any funding applications. It helps you think through, okay, let's revisit. What is it that we are trying to do? And if, why are we doing this kind of thing on the ground in this community in Uganda or Zambia or wherever? Why is it that we think that if we do that, it's going to end up with those, those impacts or those changes for the better within the community? Why do we think that? Why do our partners think that? How is it that we see that we are going to be able to make the difference that we want to make? And I see there's a bit of help there on how to develop a theory of change, so that will be useful. That is, as I say, I know that's something that funders do ask for, and it sounds more intimidating than it is. It's just setting out your assumptions very clearly. In terms of budgeting, another big mistake is putting together an ineligible or an unrealistic budget. And this goes back to what I said at the beginning about eligibility criteria. If there's a 10% limit on overheads, do not put 15%. Again, you think that would be obvious. A lot of applicants get that kind of thing wrong. And in terms of the overall request for funding, pitch it at the right level. The temptation, of course, is to go for the maximum amount that's allowed, but that is not a smart move if you haven't got the capacity or the experience to absorb that level of funding. And although it sounds a bit perverse, too much money can be as much of a problem as too little. And if you just go right up to the maximum as well, it can also look to the funder like you haven't really thought very carefully about the actual cost or the actual budget. And if there's a pot of money that's with a £20,000 limit, and magically your budget adds up to exactly £19,999, that may not look very convincing. And then a final one, you can get everything right and avoid all of the mistakes I've mentioned so far and put it all together brilliantly, and then miss the deadline. So of course that one goes right in the bin, and it's such a heartbreaker, and I have seen this happen. So the mistake to avoid is waiting until the very last minute to submit your application and then find that you've ended up with computer problems. And these days, a lot of funders use a portal where you have to submit things all through the same thing. So of course, if everyone's trying to do it at 1 minute to midnight on a Sunday night, that is a very stressful experience that I'm sure a number of us have been through. So try and allow yourself some breathing space. And I know it's easier said than done if you're a volunteer or a trustee and you're doing this on top of your day job, but it will reduce stress levels all around to give yourself some breathing space. And obviously, you want to make sure the application actually goes in, because you've got to be in it to win it. Next slide. I know this is, we're mainly talking about when you are applying before or when you are applying for funding, but I also wanted to raise a couple of mistakes for afterwards as well, whether or not you're successful or unsuccessful. I think one of them is not taking to heart feedback that you get. I know it's not always available from funders, especially if you're rejected at an early stage, but usually if you have got through at least, to the shortlisting part and got through to the next round, there should be some indication from the funder of where you've fallen short. Hopefully it's not just going to be a standard thing saying, due to the high quality of applications, unfortunately you did not make it. They should, the good ones will help you see where you've gone wrong. And of course, it's never easy to hear no, but if you do try and learn along the way, you're more likely to hear yes the next time. And of course, there's always going to be a next time. I would also flip this round and say a mistake is not to give feedback to the funder to help them improve their processes if there's something that has arisen. The good ones will ask you for it. The best ones will even listen to it and take it on board to make some changes. But even for the ones who don't ask for it outright, I have always felt very strongly that donor education is important. Obviously, some of the hurdles they put in place are deliberate, but others they may not be aware of. And if you can feedback to say, actually, our partners in Uganda were not able to access your application portal, that's something they need to know. If you're successful with a grant, try to build in some reflections on processes into reporting. Again, the good ones will ask for it. And this is just to try and redress some of that inherent power imbalance between funders and applicants. Then finally, just a couple of points to finish on, longer term things to think about. It's really important to stay up to date with changes in the sector. I think there's been some interesting stuff that's come out recently from Restless Development, for example, on power restoring funding. In other words, funding that helps to restore power and addresses power imbalances. I think there was a note earlier on that said, terminology, staying up to date with that is important. And the final point is just to say, when you are successful, that's not the end of the story. It's just the beginning. You want to develop a good relationship with your funder. And funders don't want to be thought of as just money bags or an ATM. It's like going off to uni. Your parents like to get a call from you because you love them and you miss them, not just because you've run out of money. So don't let the only time you get in touch with your funder be when you're requesting your next payment. You want to have a dialogue and build up a longer term relationship, because that is also very useful. So, final slide. Just to say thanks very much to everybody. I hope that was useful, and I think we've got some time set aside for questions now, so I'll try and help if I can. Thanks.
Linnea, thank you. That was really informative. I found that really helpful. Some really sound advice. Thank you.
Thanks.
So far in the chat, we haven't had any questions. Please do put your questions in the chat box. I'll say here so that it should pop up with a little mark. Yes. But if you like, you can put your hand up if you have any questions for Linnea, or you can put your question in the chat. I also, Linnea, you saw that I put some links into different tools for theory of change. And I guess whilst we're waiting for the questions to come in, it's also worth saying that Hub Cymru Africa, we give free advice and support. So if you have any, Carol's having to leave. Bye, Carol. So if you do ever need any advice or support, then do drop Hub Cymru Africa an email. I'll put the email address in the chat now. But Lena, you've got a question.
Yes. Hi, and thanks very much, Linnea, for that very informative presentation. I am curious to hear whether anything has significantly changed, like in terms of funders' expectations. What you notice, or is there anything you can highlight over the last, I don't know, years or whatever period? But significant changes.
No, that's interesting, and I do think there have been changes, and that's why I've said it's important to stay up to date. I think there is certainly much more emphasis now on what I was talking about in terms of balance and partnership. I think most good funders now would not want to be looking at an application where it seems like all the ideas have come from somewhere outside the country where the work is taking place, or all the expertise or all the analysis is happening somewhere else. Funders are going to want to see evidence that there is real partnership there, and that that there is a mechanism for partners to be working together to develop those ideas. I think that's something that has changed. I think there's probably also some more rigor on some of the budgetary side, some of the monitoring and evaluation side that previously, certainly in my own field of HIV, there was a lot of money sloshing around for a while because of the emergency of HIV, and the money was being pushed out, and there wasn't always a lot of there wasn't, quite frankly, adequate follow-up of how that money was being spent, and monitoring that it was being used well, and so on. I think that because of the pressure on funders as well as the pressure on applicants, I think there's much more rigor on some of that now as well. So it means all of us have to raise our game if we want to be successful in getting that funding and being able to turn, one grant into the next one, because as soon as you get one, you're always having to think about the next one. So, that's an issue as well.
Thanks, Linnea. I guess that leads into another question that I would have in terms of if you were, obviously we don't want to have a scattergun approach where we use the same application for everybody, but there is prep work that's relevant to all funders, isn't there? So what would be your advice around that, around preparing for putting in funding applications?
I think that's very true. And I think you can, feel quite green about it when you recycle bits of applications, because, the work that you invest in developing a good application is never wasted, even if you aren't successful in one attempt that you make. Because there are, as you say, there are common points that different funders are going to look at in terms of, how you describe your mission and purpose, things like theory of change, just having your documents to hand, because again, you don't want to be there 11:30 on the, coming up to midnight on the Sunday night and you think, oh, they want a copy of the Constitution. Where the heck is that? Or, some of that basic organizational documentation in terms of, your registration certificate or your charity number or whatever. Make sure you've got those basics to hand. But yeah, I think it's taking the time when you're not under pressure of the deadline to think through what is it that you're trying to achieve? How are you going to be able to demonstrate that? And building up what I mentioned before, building up that evidence of impact. How are you being able to show that you've made a difference? Because if you don't start doing it now, you won't be able to demonstrate it when it comes to, okay, show me as a funder that you're saying I should give you money to do X and you've been doing it for a couple of years now. You should be able to give me some evidence of the difference that you're making. So that is just really important to be doing, even when you're not actively putting in an application yet.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Still, please do feel free to raise your hand or to put the question in the chat if you have any questions. I think, Linnea, for me, I really valued the point that you made around partnership and how you work with your partners to develop your project proposals. I have a 2-point question on that. I mean, one is, there are barriers to working remotely with organizations. So I guess one is looking at, how do we ensure that there's genuine partnership when we're developing those project proposals? And then also, how do we articulate that effectively within a grant application, whether it's a 2-pager or whether it's a form?
That is tricky, and I know, as I say, as a trustee, we've been struggling with that as well, particularly during the pandemic, where we haven't been able to even do the usual annual visit, where you get the chance to sit down and talk face to face with partners, and that is hard. I think one thing is, and it relates to funding as well. Make sure that you are supporting the costs for your partners of being able to take part in those sorts of consultations, because I think we forget, because we've got Wi-Fi, quite readily available. We forget maybe sometimes here in Wales that partners are going to be working from on the basis of data bundles, or where they have to actually buy the data bundle. They haven't got unlimited Wi-Fi, and so supporting mobile phone costs or data bundles or whatever to enable that kind of dialogue is important, even if you have to do it remotely. But yeah, it's true, it is not easy, and it's much easier to sit under a tree with with a nice cold drink and be able to talk to the partners and share the load of developing the ideas. But we've all had to try and find ways around that, I suppose. Sorry, I don't know if that managed to get both ends of your question.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. I guess it's just in terms of the, within the funding application, articulating how you came to those collective decisions, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, and making sure you do record, because that's something they'll want to see. We had a brainstorming meeting on X day, or whatever. That just gives more weight to what you're saying if you're demonstrating and you have some sort of specific proof of how you came to do that together. That is something a good funder will want to see.
Great. Okay, so we have a chat. We have a question in the chat, but first Carol's got hands up. So Carol, I'm going to invite you to take yourself off mic and ask the question, and then we'll come to Dina's question after that.
Thanks, Kath. Thank you for that presentation. It was really eye-opening. One of the things you spoke about, no, it's really so informative. It's you can always learn, it doesn't matter how long you've been involved in fundraising, there's always something where you have that aha moment. One of the things you mentioned, which was not treating your funders as an ATM, yes. Building that relationship. And that started me thinking about continuation funding. You've started a project, it's 2 years in, the work is not completed. So I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about your tips on continuation funding, or even working with another fund, that thing that we get into where just because the money has ended doesn't mean the need for the project has ended.
No, in fact, it's very often the other way around. And different funders do have, that's a great question, and different funders have different approaches to it. I've seen some funders and been part of some funders that take a deliberately long-term approach to supporting work, recognizing that, as you say, a 2-year project, amazingly enough, is not going to sort out all the, the difficulties or challenges that a community is facing. And so they may have, some funders have a sort of tiered funding kind of arrangement where, if you're a new grantee, they're not going to give you huge amounts to start with. They want you to prove yourself and, see what you've learned along the way. And if you manage to do that successfully, then you can be re-invited to apply, for a next tranche, etc. So some of them do work in that way. Others seem to like to say, to just kind of build their numbers and say, we've granted to blah, blah, many thousand people. And so if you've had it once, they don't want to refund people for a second go, which I always find a bit odd. But I think, you need to kind of be planning for this as you go along. Don't wait until you get towards the end of your grant, obviously, before you start thinking about this. And that's where part of that dialogue comes in with the funder to understand, what is your sort of policy on this? What are the chances of, being able to turn this into a second phase of a project? I think sometimes also it can help, in terms of the way you plan your applications. If you look at something like, let's look at this as a pilot phase and establishing proof of concept of a good idea. And then you can then roll that into something where it's then scaling up because you've proved that it works at this scale, then you want to take it to the next scale. So it very much depends on, different funders' approaches to that. But I agree with you. It's absolutely something that needs to be thought of, from an early stage.
Thank you very much. I think what you said about proof of concept, sometimes people will ask, what is your exit strategy? And if you kind of say, well, this is proof of concept, it kind of shows that, it ties it into, well, that's the exit strategy, sort of thing. If they only want to fund it for that period of time.
Yes.
Help.
Well, and actually, funders themselves often talk internally about their own exit strategy in terms of, that they don't want to just be funding the same partners over again because they also want to refresh what they're doing. So it's sort of, actually, there's sometimes a mirror process that's going on within the grant maker and the grantee.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Carol, for your question. I'm going to invite Dina. Are you okay to take yourself off mute, Dina?
Yes,
always.
hello.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask about when you're preparing a budget. Is it good to have a contingency fund? You know, often the price of what you're doing, the cost in country has changed, and it might be 6 months or so before you're actually doing the project, and the exchange rate can have changed quite dramatically. And so, as well as should we have a contingency in the budget? And is it good to have raised some money ourselves towards the project?
Okay, two separate questions. I'll try and deal with both of them, and both good ones. Yeah, in terms of contingency, I think we're all, especially looking at how inflation is hitting everywhere, and how exchange rates are also changing rapidly. That is something that I, as a grant maker, always, welcomed that people would build in, because it shows, again, recognition of the realities on the ground. The difficulty sometimes is, it depends on the individual funder. Some funders are more sympathetic to that, others are not. And because they are trying to cover their own risk and they don't want to be writing a blank check. So some funders will actually say, changes in exchange rate over the course of the project, are basically, are your responsibility. You can't come back for additional funding because of exchange rate changes. So that does mean that we have to be careful when we are putting together a budget that involves obviously different currencies, to try and allow for that and build in some contingency if we can. Some funders will just say a straight 10% or whatever, as with overheads, they might allow for contingency, to try and budget on the generous side if you can, so that you do have a bit of that wiggle room, because it is very hard to, you don't want to be in a position where you can't achieve the aims of your project because the prices of the materials have gone up or what have you, and then you can't do what you said you would. But that's also part of the feedback you need to be giving to the funders as well. If you're on a quarterly or annual reports saying that this has become difficult for these reasons, I always felt, if there was a good justification for it, then we would try and find some extra funding. But not all funders take that approach, unfortunately. And the second bit, remind me, what was the second one? Besides the contingency.
Yeah, is it good to say that we've raised
yes.
even a couple of £100 towards a £5,000 project?
Sure. I think it's always worth saying that, we're not expecting all this to come from outside. We've made our own efforts, and, that if you can show that as part of the total budget, you've already got some of it there, then, I think most funders would welcome that, to show that they're not carrying it all completely on their shoulders, but that, you've done some of it as well. As a funder, I would always welcome that.
Is it good to put in the application that there are risks, and one of the risks is that the exchange rate will change, and we will cover the change of exchange rate?
Again, it depends on the funder. Some funders will certainly ask you for a quite detailed risk assessment and being able to, and risk mitigation strategies, that which shows your analysis of the situation and what that risk could mean for your project. So, but I think even just internally for yourselves as trustees or staff or volunteers, you need to be very aware of those risks and what the potential impact could be. So I can't speak on behalf of all funders. A lot of funders do want to see that, you have thought through those risks and how you would handle them. To me, that would demonstrate a kind of, good grasp of the situation on the ground and an understanding of the fact that you've thought it through and you've already got some plans in mind for how to deal with it. So I would see that as a plus.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Did anybody else have any questions? We've still got 5 minutes left. Okay, I tell you what, whilst I'm waiting for people to ask their questions, what I will do is put into the chat, whilst people are thinking of their questions, I'm going to put into the chat what is happening for the rest of the week. So you can see that we have 2 more lunch and learns left. One is having a look at, it's a masterclass in your USP, your USP being your unique selling point. So hopefully we'll learn some skills about speaking concisely about what we do and the impact of our work. And then there's also a sector celebrating success. So this is members of the Wales Africa community who are part of small kind of community links and small charities sharing their tips from their experiences of fundraising. There's also still some slots available for one-to-one advice. I think we're going to be looking too late for today, but there's sessions available for Thursday and Friday. You can meet with Linnea. Your sessions are fully booked now, are they?
I think I might still have a couple left.
Okay, you can meet. You can. Linnea has some slots. Linnea has some slots available.
I'm in Llandaff rather than Splot, but you know, whatever.
Where you can have like a one-to-one session and talk immediately with Linnea about anything you're working on. Similarly, the DSMs, those are Hub Cymru Africa team members, development support managers. We can talk you through anything, as well as grant giving organisations. So WCVA, Egmont Trust. We particularly advise you to take your to invite your African partners to join you to meet the Egmont Trust. So the form is there for the one-to-one advice slots. There is a community of practice. This group meets once every 8 weeks. If you click on that form there, it takes you to a registration form, and that just logs your email with us, so that then when there's a meeting coming, I'll drop you an email to let you know and the link and invite you to the session. And also there's some videos. So this is the second time that this event has happened in May. So last May's videos are already on our YouTube channel, and this year's videos are being updated and included. So there's yesterday's session, which is the digital development grants, and then Monday's session, which was Benefit to Wales. And this session will also then be put on to the YouTube channel as well. So you'll be able to catch up with anything that you've missed. Right, and I'm going to do a poll, but before I do the poll, so please do stay on the line and do the poll, because it really does help me. Before I do the poll, John is in Uganda, and he has asked Linnea, is in-kind contribution still vital when drawing budgets?
I think, again, depending on the funder, that can be very useful, and because some things that don't involve a monetary cost but involve people's time, for example, you know, or other support, whether it's, say, use of a building or what have you, that can help show, as relating back to the previous question, show that you are already contributing something from your side. So again, as a funder, I would always welcome that. Different funders will have different rules about what you can include in your budget, or what you can include as part of your you know, matching funding if they're asking for that. Some of them want to see, you know, it just in cold hard cash, but others will also allow you to include in kind. So it's always worth remembering that. And that's even things like, you know, volunteer trustees' time and doing stuff, or what have you, is, we like to think, is worth something. So so yeah, it is useful if you can include that.
Brilliant, thank you, Linnea. John, I hope that answers your question. I am going to launch the poll now. So hopefully you've got a pop-up now that asks you some questions. There's only 7 questions, so it won't take you too long, hopefully. But whilst you're having a look at that, I will have a look at some other comments. Lena, I can see that you've said that, Linnea, what's your experience, recommendations with including overhead costs within your budget?
Again, always look to see, you know, what the funder will support. Very often they do have a specific limit. Often it's something around, you know, 10 to 12%. I'd be a bit concerned as a funder, you know, to see things much higher than that, because you also need to look things that you know, are you calling it overhead when actually you could pull it out in a separate budget line to keep sort of the generic overheads bit lower, but it could be a specific budget line for something else. So that's one way to sort of get around it. You notice I'm not doing the poll, so I'm not inflating.
Thank you.
I'm not inflating the answers one way or the
other. Thanks, Linnea. Did that answer your question, Lena?
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, and then Lynn has a question. She's saying that she has an Empower Soap Solutions, and they are looking to put in a joint application to the Wales Africa grant with Chempop, and they're looking at sorry, I've lost my train of thought now. They're considering making a joint application. Will this be beneficial?
Again, it can be, as I mentioned in the presentation, because it shows that, you know, it's already encouraging some, you know, partnership and mutual learning and so on. Now, it may also depend on the status of the different organizations, because I can see you're saying you're currently in the process of getting registered charity status. And if you don't have that yet, there are a number of funders that say we only accept applications from organizations that are already registered. So that can be beneficial kind of when you're in that transition period to, you know, to partner up with someone who can be the lead applicant, and you can be the supporting band, as it were. And then, you know, you can maybe then, once you get the status, be a lead applicant on something else.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it would be worth talking to the funder. So WCVA are very open to people getting in touch and asking them questions. So I would definitely recommend calling them and talking through it with them. I don't think for the Wales Africa grant you have to be a registered charity, but I could be wrong on that. I think being a constituted group would suffice.
Yes, again, it depends on the individual funder. And that's going back to the point I made about if there's help available or there's a facility to ask questions, whether in writing or on, you know, phone call or whatever, make use of it. It will definitely help you. So don't be shy to, you know, to get in touch with funders if they allow that.
Brilliant. Okay, lovely. I am going to close the poll because it looks like everybody has had a chance to answer. Thank you very much for those of you who have. I appreciate it. I'm going to end the poll, and then somebody has written in the chat. We've got 3 minutes left before we finish. What does it say? Any link to apply for partnerships with WCVA? Thank you. So Carol has said thank you very much. And then Precious, who is based in Zimbabwe, is looking for a partner in Wales. So I guess if anybody is interested, we as Hub Cymru Africa can't broker relationships at all, but feel free to contact each other directly. We're not going to stop that. Okay, lovely. Carol, you're asking what Precious does. Maybe Precious, do you want to message Carol directly on the function? I'll leave the meeting go for a couple of more minutes so that you guys can connect. But Linnea, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. I found it really insightful and really helpful. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you also to everybody, and just say, you know, don't give up. I know it's a frustrating process at times, but you know, we've all been there. You know, just keep persevering and you will be successful.
Words to live by. Thank you, Linnea.
Thank you so much. Really good
Bye,
having
everyone.
you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.